Hey, this is Hans from Request for Music, and I want to do a new demo for Wires because I've added quite some stuff in there, and it's getting, yeah, maybe even complicated, but I just want to have a look around at what is in there. So this is Wires, the Wires module, which is sort of a remake of a simulation that was once there. It's called World of Wires, and you have this line across the screen where you can set oscillators on and where you can set output signals that you can send, and there's a this running current sort of that runs through, or an electron that runs through the wire and then triggers all of the stuff that it encounters. So if excuse me, if I would connect this up, if I would hook this up now, you will only get this sort of sonar kind of sound that you can hear, and that's because this one is selected, and there's only one oscillator in there. First of all, I'll clear everything by using the reset button, and we have a grid in the middle. On the left there's knobs and a switch that have to do with the sound of the oscillators, and on the top we've got modulation stuff here, and something that we'll look at later, the start of the pulse, or the restarting of the electric current. And there's a global switch for everything or for all of the oscillators separately. If you switch that off, you'll be able to go through the oscillators separately. At the bottom, of course, there's a level and a left and a right output. And as said, on the right, I have some knobs and stuff that have to do with the overall grid. So I've got a reset, I've got a random button and a random input. I've got a transpose for the complete module output. I've got a speed and and a grid setting and the grid mode. And first of all, I'll dial back the grid size, because what this is. Grid is the size of the grid. So now I have this 4 lines, these 4 rows of 8 of 8 grid cells. The mode is important with that, because if I have it switched off like it is now, it's actually calculating 36 how do I say that, 36 volts of steps over this. So actually 3 octaves. I must tell it correctly. 3 octaves of sound over this, of pitch. And if I switch it up, it's going to go through a chromatic tones. So that means that if I have it switched off and I need a couple of cells, so I have my my normal key just creates wires, and if I use my shift key, I can press to create an oscillator there. And if I select another cell like this one, if I click on that with the command or control key, I'll start a current there. So you hear that it's starting, and then since the wire is not interconnected, it will stop at that point. So I can actually pull on a wire and add an extra oscillator on this, and if I start it here, then and you hear now that there's actually when it's switched off, there is sort of a detuning going on over the horizontal line. If I would go up, then the frequency will go up. So if I put a next one, say here, so now the wire can go up as well. So I'll start this. You hear a higher frequency here, and it's actually also doing it crosswise, so it's diagonal. So if I switch this on as well and click there, so, and start it up, you get something like this. And the speed obviously defines how much time it takes from one cell to go to the next one. So if I dial this back, I can start again. And now the thing is that I may want to rerun this. So I have this start button, and the start button means that there's an internal oscillator that can look at points that I define to be such a starting point, because so far I just clicked my command button and I clicked on this cell and it started there. But I have this automatic way of doing that, and that's just a matter of double clicking within this cell. You get this point, and now this is the automatic starting point. And now it looks at the start button, and it looks at this start integer which it takes as a number of steps before going to a start again. So I have this number of cells and say that I want 16 steps in total that it will count with. Then it takes a number of steps. Now it waits for the total amount of cells and then goes back. So you can sort of create your own sequencer that way. Okay, so this is running at the moment, and now at the left I've got my voice selection, because if the global is off, I can actually go to each of those oscillators to set them to a specific value. It goes on because there can be up to 32 oscillators in there, but if I start with the first, I can actually change the setting for that first oscillator, change the attack, decay, sustain, release, change the cutoff frequency and the resonance, but at the moment it is switched to a sine wave. The bottom is sine wave, the middle one is a triangle, and the top one is a saw wave. So if I actually set this to all and dial this up, I can dial the cutoff frequency, change the cutoff, the resonance, and work with that. And obviously I can have, and let's dial this back for now. I can of course add modulation as well, and only the interesting ones are modulatable. So that means that I can set the speed or the transposing, or cutoff or resonance or any of the ADSR things, and a master one, and restart. Restarting was this knob that would count that number of steps. So first of all, let's look at the transpose. Obviously I have a transpose here, so that means that I can go 2 octaves up or 2 octaves down. So let's set it to -12, and maybe let's take an LFO in there. So I can take this out, put it into the first, and take the LFO to dial in the transpose. So I could actually modulate it, and I think it would be pretty useful to add an attenuator in. So if I take my attenuator and take this back in here and then dial that on, I have the option of changing it to something more useful, of course. So let's take the transpose back. And of course I can change this to any of the other settings. So let's take cutoff. Let's dial this up and so something like that. And one thing more that is in there, and I'll let you listen to that in a different way. I'll take this out and I'll start a new grid. So I have this chromatic scale thing and I had this mode thing. And as long as the mode is switched off, this makes sense, right? Because otherwise it's just being, yeah, a chromatic way of working. So that means that if I take this number of cells, if I take a line like this, because up is going up in pitch. So if I set oscillators to these points and I switch on the current, and I'll do it automatically. So it's now it's going through this way, but it's oops, I'll have to switch this down. Now it's using the 36 steps from this overall thing that's using, and if I would use none, it would be, it might even be, yeah, false actually, because if I take more on one line, these are going up in small detunings. As soon as I set this to chromatic, this will go up in chromatic, but still it will do detune over an amount of these steps. So that means that if I set a larger grid, and as soon as I change my grid, it will cut off every sound. But I'll just add such a line again and add these oscillators again and double click. Actually, you can hear now that the number of steps is incorrect. I need to set this longer. So now I could dial, if I knew exactly how many steps these were, I can actually dial this back to make it exactly that amount of steps. So now it just repeats this cycle. Going up from some point, I can actually just take a couple of those lines so I can actually create really weird stuff. And if I want to have some other notes that start at the same point as this starting point, I can actually just put some extra steps in there. So let's take 2, and I'll put an oscillator here, and I put the start point there. So now this starts at the exact same point as this one does. So I can use multiple of those lines, and if I want sort of a delay in there, I'll just make sure that I use a longer line where I set the oscillator at the last point. Start this. And if I'm in this mode, so this one is down, now it's at chromatic. If I use major steps, then it'll use a major quantization to use those, or to set those notes to. And you've got a couple of scales to choose from. So if you put it to pentatonic, it will have different behavior. If you use it at, what do we have, octatronic, you'll have different settings, because then it divides it over a different number of steps. So you can really play around with that. But as soon as I switch this up, it will go through normal chromatic way of working. So that means that I have to think of where the notes are, and I might actually add an extra an extra scale or an extra drop down to set the basic note for the bottom one, for instance, because now it's, as far as I know, it's still starting at C. So I might do that before it comes out. But that's actually how it works at the moment, and you can really play around with that and create sequences or melodies or whatever, or just do some random stuff, because there's also a random thing in there. So if I click this, it just creates randoms, and then there might be from those starting points in there as well, and you can actually, if you don't like those, you can double click those to get rid of them, and then this would be the normal rerun that it does. If there is not such a starting point, it will remain silent. If, on the other hand, I would actually take my modulation, the thing that this is only for the internal start, but I can obviously take an LFO out to change this random setting. So now it just comes up, and if there is a current that it can use, it will switch to that sound. So there might be nice stuff in between. Could be messy. I could still change this to a different settings, so you get different kind of sounds there, of course, because now the overall note scaling is different over the grid, both horizontal and vertical, because horizontal is sort of fine-tuning or detuning. So that even means that if you wouldn't want to use such a thing, and you would let's reset this again, and if I just click a cell somewhere, I'll just click a couple of those, and I'll put in oscillators there, something like this, and this one will start. So, and I'm going to switch off this to none. Now I've got these notes that are slightly off. So, and I can actually try to, it doesn't really change that at the moment. Because actually it's just a matter of playing around with this. I'll take these out, and I can actually use my right click mouse button to remove stuff. So I can just draw something weird in and push my shift button and click on some cells somewhere. So those will be the oscillators, and if I want to run it from somewhere, I could press my command or control click, and then it would run that and go through those notes, right? And the speed is decided by this. And if at some point it, because the current can sort of run into itself and run backwards, and it can remain in sort of a loop at some point. So that if I would draw something like this, and I would draw it all the way around, as soon as I start it at some point here and wait for it to end, and then click on the last one to close it up, there will not be a problem. So if I click an oscillator here and here, for instance, and I'll start it here, and now I click this to close it, now it's closed, and it will remain running in that one direction. And then I can just create side steps from it like this, and create an extra note that it can run, and it could go here and create a next one, and create one here, and maybe there. So there can be a lot of experimenting that you could do. If I click this now off to chromatic, it'll try to keep the same or the notes within a certain scale, right? I've got it still set to mode off. As soon as I switch the mode on, it will go back to chromatic behavior for the full scale of these steps. So different sound altogether from this. So yeah, that's sort of is what is in there. As I said, there may come an extra starting node for the grid afterwards. I'll have to look at that if and how that is possible. But otherwise, it will probably be out in the next couple of days or so. So I hope you liked it so far, and I'll be back with something else at a later stage. So see you in the next video. Cheers.